This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. A critical reset in relations. Lawmakers from China and the European Union to meet face-to-face for the first time in 7 years. On the agenda, trade and investment amid rising U.S. tensions. Now, Japan's ruling party chief begins coalition talks with the right-leaning Japan Innovation Party. Sanae Takaichi seeking support before next week's Prime Minister vote after Komeito quit its 26-year alliance with the LDP. Now, Cambodia's Prime Minister expressing regret over the death of a South Korean national in his country following a meeting between officials from both sides to discuss flying home some 60 scam victims. And in business, the world's largest contract chip maker TSMC reporting a big increase in profit for the quarter, thanks mostly for the hottest item on the market right now, AI chips. Ahead on the bulletin, the UN's World Food Programme says staggering aid cuts are pushing nearly 14 million people into emergency levels of hunger.
If I get any chance, I would, of course, go to China and I learn something.
India's future tech leaders are turning away from the US. But is China's new K visa all it's made out to be? Delegates from China and the EU are holding talks at the European Parliament in Brussels. It's their first joint session in more than 7 years, a move that largely signals a thaw in relations. Trade, security concerns, and Russia's war in Ukraine topping the agenda. Efforts to seek closer relations come in light of sweeping U.S. levies imposed by the Trump administration. Both China and EU marked their 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations back in May. Ties have been steadily improving over the past months. China lifted sanctions against 5 EU Parliament members in April. The sanctions were imposed in 2021 over Western measures against Chinese officials accused of the mass detention of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. EU then had hailed the move as a step in restoring parliamentary dialogue with China. We're covering the story for CNA, none other than William Denslow, live from Brussels. Will, we know that China and EU, they have expressed openness to improving bilateral relations, both economically and diplomatically. But just how sustainable are such efforts?
Well, Telly, there are real concerns, real headwinds that exist in this trade relationship in a year that should be somewhat of a celebration. You mentioned 50 years of these diplomatic ties between the EU and China. We saw Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, in Beijing back in July. But even that trip was shortened, which really highlights the deep divisions that exist between the two parties. Now, these talks, as you rightly mentioned, significant in themselves. The fact that it's been more than 7 years since this last inter-parliamentary meeting between Chinese and EU delegations. And the meeting's been broken down into 2 blocks. The first block, areas of mutual cooperation, mutual interest. So things like climate change, security, sustainable development, before the thornier issues, things like trade as well. But one source that I've been speaking to about the nature of these talks, well, described them as initially being somewhat of a charm offensive, but this source tells me that as these talks have gotten closer, it's been more offensive and less charm offensive.
So, Will, clearly tough discussions remain, talking about trade, China's close ties with Russia. So how then do you think the EU is navigating these without compromising relations with its allies?
Well, Ateli, as you mentioned, communication is seen by both sides as absolutely crucial. We've heard in recent days from Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, who says that they're firmly keen to uphold partnerships, respect more communication between the two sides, and to jointly address challenges going forward. The EU, for its part, has also expressed that willingness for dialogue. We understand that Maroš Šefčovič, the Trade Commissioner, here at the EU, is expected to speak with Chinese counterparts next week as well. But there are huge concerns, especially these long-standing issues between the two sides. Of course, prominently and featuring most closely in the last couple of weeks has been these concerns about the export of those rare earth minerals, these magnets, absolutely crucial for high tech going forward. That has been described by the Trade Commissioner as a very concerning measures. We've also heard recently from Denmark's foreign minister expressing potential solutions or counteractions, saying that if there's investment in Europe, then there must be technology transfer. Now, that proposal has been met with plenty of cold water from Beijing, with a spokesperson in Beijing describing it as a protectionist policy as well. There are other underlying issues, such as access to the Chinese market, a huge area of concern as far as Brussels sees things, as well as, of course, these subsidised goods being dumped on the European market, things like cars, things like steel. So those are huge concerns as well. And, of course, concerns that Beijing very much rebukes. And to these tariffs we've seen on things like EVs, well, again, Beijing's message has been that's a protectionist policy that doesn't suit anyone, of course, further complicating relations at a time where there's plenty of thorniness when it comes to both these blocs' relationships with Washington as well. So big questions whether both sides can afford to have a frictious relationship at a time where their ties with Washington are also somewhat up in the air.
Quite a few issues to iron out, certainly. Thanks so very much for that report. William Denslow reporting for CNA in Brussels. Well, China also seeking stronger bilateral ties in Europe, where we see Foreign Minister Wang Yi saying that he wants to boost high-level exchanges with France and to build mutual trust. Well, Mr. Wang met the French presidential diplomatic advisor Emmanuel Bon at a strategic dialogue in Beijing yesterday. Well, he said that China is ready for all-round cooperation and hopes Paris could provide, quote, solid political guarantees for bilateral relations. Mr. Bon, on his part, stressed France's independent diplomacy and said that they look forward to deepening cooperation in new energy and technology. Now, both diplomats, as they agreed to maintain communications, also touched on the Ukraine crisis, the Middle East situation, as well as the global governance system. Japan's newly elected ruling party leader is eyeing a new path to the premiership. Sanae Takaichi is exploring a coalition with a right-leaning party to shore up support to clinch the prime minister vote and become Japan's first female prime minister. A Liberal Democratic Party held talks with the Japan Innovation Party, or JIP, today. Taken together, the two parties will be 2 seats short of a majority in the lower house, which holds the deciding vote to choose the next prime minister. Now, reports say their discussions included short-term economic measures, a second capital, as well as the country's long-term direction. Now, Japan was thrown into political limbo last week after the ruling party's coalition partner, Komeito, quit their 26-year partnership. Now, this has set off a flurry of political meetings before Parliament votes next week to name a new prime minister. Top opposition parties, including the JIP, have also held meetings to find a unified candidate that could oust the ruling party. A union would give the opposition group enough votes to name a prime minister and block Ms. Takaichi's bid. Local media reports say the group is pushing to delay the vote, calling it a once-in-a-decade opportunity to change the government. However, differences remain over key issues such as defense and nuclear energy. A Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet has expressed regret over the death of a South Korean national in his country. The Cambodian leader said this at a meeting with a South Korean joint task force that landed in Phnom Penh late yesterday. The task force, led by Vice Foreign Minister Kim Jin-ah, was sent to help its nationals lured into working in Cambodian scam compounds. The two sides are now working to arrange the repatriation of about 60 South Koreans who were rescued in recent police raids. Now, the hope is to fly them home by this weekend. Seoul says that more than 1,000 South Koreans are believed to be among some 200,000 people from various countries working in scam centers in Cambodia. To keep pressure on the criminal networks, a permanent Korean desk will embed liaison officers with Cambodian police. High-level follow-up talks are scheduled in Seoul next week. The South Korean action comes after a 22-year-old student was kidnapped, tortured and killed in August over a $35,000 ransom. Now, Cambodian prosecutors have charged 3 suspects and are looking for others. Well, South Korea's foreign ministry says reported abductions have soared to roughly 330 this year, mostly tied to Cambodia-based cyber fraud compounds. Yesterday, Seoul issued its highest level 4 travel ban for parts of Cambodia, including Poipet and Kampot. Meanwhile, the United States and United Kingdom have slapped coordinated sanctions on alleged ringleaders of Cambodian criminal groups. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight. Apple suppliers in Asia end the day mixed, even as the American tech titan promised more investments in China. And South Korean officials express optimism as they head to Washington for follow-up trade negotiations. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and it is our time for business. And Roland is here to tell us all about the AI rush happening once again. So which company has profited big time?
Well, you've heard of it. It's the company that supplies to the likes of Nvidia and Apple and highly associated with artificial intelligence, TSMC. The world's biggest producer of advanced AI chips reported third quarter profit hitting a record high, surging 39% on year. It is its 6th consecutive quarter of double-digit profit growth and yet another beat on analysts' expectations. In US dollar terms, TSMC's third quarter profit came in at $14.76 billion. That's a 39.1% on-year increase. Net income increased by 13.7% from the last quarter, which had marked a record high at the time. The high-performance computing division, encompassing artificial intelligence and 5G applications, made up the majority of third-quarter sales, accounting for some 57% of total revenue. TSMC says it expects robust AI demand to continue, though it flagged potential business impact from U.S. trade tariffs and currency moves. TSMC shares ending the day 1.3% in the green. Its shares in Taiwan have risen by more than 39% so far this year. And just in case you thought it was over, U.S. President Donald Trump has declared a return to a trade war with China.
Mr. President, you're meeting with President Xi in a few weeks.
Yeah.
If you can't come to an agreement or a deal at that meeting, are we in for a sustained trade war with China?
Well, you're in one now. Look, we have 100% tariff. If we didn't have tariffs, we would be exposed as being a nothing. We would have no defense.
Now, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is roping in the rest of the world. He has warned that the U.S. and other countries would be forced to decouple from China if it continues with its expansion of rare earth export controls.
Make no mistake, this is China versus the world. They have put these unacceptable export controls on the entire world. China is a command and control economy, and we and our allies will neither be commanded nor controlled. They are a state economy, and we are not going to let a group of bureaucrats in Beijing try to manage the global supply chains.
He instead suggested an extended tariff truce in exchange for delaying the sweeping new curbs. He added that Mr. Trump is still on track to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea later this month, although Beijing has not confirmed that meeting. But China's foreign ministry stressed it remains open to negotiations after President Trump threatened to cut U.S. imports of Chinese cooking oil.
中方在处理中美经贸问题上的立场是一贯的、明确的。贸易战、关税战没有赢家，不符合任何一方利益。双方应在平等、尊重、互惠的基础上协商解决有关问题。
American tech titan Apple is looking past U.S.-China tensions to make a big bet on Beijing. Now, China's industry minister says that CEO Tim Cook promised to boost investment during a visit to the country. He also agreed to deepen cooperation as Trade Minister Li Lecheng urged Apple to work more closely with local suppliers. The iPhone maker has been diversifying supply chains by shifting manufacturing to India and parts of Southeast Asia. It has also made investment pledges to Washington. U.S. tech companies face a tough balancing act amid rising tensions between Washington and Beijing. But Apple has been relatively unscathed, even as the likes of Nvidia and Qualcomm have been targeted. Shares of Apple suppliers ending the day mixed after surging yesterday, though. Bucking the trend, Lux share is up 1.7% for the day in Shenzhen. And Lens Technology, well, it's the biggest loser, down by nearly 2.9%. China has slammed the Dutch government for seizing Chinese-owned chipmaker Nexperia, saying it firmly opposes what it calls an attempt by the Netherlands to expand its national security concept. Beijing says the move is a direct interference in the internal affairs of enterprises. The Chinese Commerce Ministry claims that this not only violates the spirit of contractual agreements and market principles, but also damages the Dutch business environment. It added that Beijing will take necessary measures to protect the lawful rights of Chinese companies. The Dutch government took control of Nexperia earlier this week, citing threats to Europe's technological security and what it terms serious governance shortcomings at the company. The chip maker, which is majority owned by China's Wing Tech since 2019, is a major supplier to the automotive and electronics industries. And this is how the markets in Greater China region closed on heightened tensions between Washington and Beijing. Shanghai Composite managing to end the day just slightly above water, Shenzhen Component down 0.25%, and Hang Seng Index also ending flat, 25,888 points. Shares of Chinese rare earth companies are taking a hit after top U.S. officials slammed China's expansion of rare earth export controls as a threat to global supply chains. The CSI Rare Earth Industry Index falling 3% for the day. Shares of Chinese robotics startup Yuanqi Technology popped 49% at the opening of its Hong Kong debut today. By the end of the day, though, it settled at 26% higher. The company's robots have been widely used in hotels such as Intercontinental and Hyatt. One analyst we spoke to says headwinds from rising U.S.-China tensions may be offset by trade deals with other nations.
Yeah, I think trade, and I just say risks from the government side of the house in the U.S. and around the rest of the world, those are certainly risks to the overall market. I think policy in general has been a tailwind. I'd say industrial policy, particularly in the U.S. and in Europe, supporting artificial intelligence and in China as well, that provides significant tailwinds to the semiconductor trade and, again, the build out of artificial intelligence. But I think Scott Bessent helps moderate maybe some of the bluster that we get from the White House, but there's certainly risks that you could see a short-term or perhaps more prolonged escalation with respect to trade tensions. But on the other hand, it's helpful we're seeing progress with India. We're very close to getting a trade deal wrapped up with South Korea. I think movement in Japan is still supportive of the relationship with the U.S. and making sure that the trade deals remain in place. So I'd say while one significant headwind might start to creep up, there's offsets with respect to that. And I'd like to think with pressure from the rest of the world that we can get to some sort of tariff détente and really work out a lot of the details like Bessent has been talking about. So hopefully we do get that meeting coming up in the next couple of weeks between Trump and Xi.
South Korea's presidential policy chief says he is optimistic about ongoing trade negotiations with the U.S. Kim Yong-bum's remarks echo those made earlier this week, suggesting progress in talks that had been stalled for months. Now, he made the comments ahead of his departure to Washington for follow-up discussions. Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwan is also on that flight. The two officials will be joining Finance Minister Koo Yun-chai as well as Trade Minister Yeo Han-koo. The delegation is expected to meet with senior U.S. negotiators, including Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. They are hoping to make progress before President Lee Jae-myung's possible meetup with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump. Seoul has been seeking to reach a deal before U.S. President Trump visits South Korea for the APEC summit later this month. Now, South Korea agreed in late July to a preliminary deal with Trump, lowering U.S. tariffs on imports to 15% from 25%. In return, South Korea would invest some $350 billion in U.S. strategic industrial sectors. A promised cut in U.S. tariffs on auto imports to 15% from 25%, however, has not been implemented for South Korea. This is because negotiations stalled over the details of the investment package. Now, household loans in South Korea grew at its slowest pace in 6 months, largely as a result of tighter lending rules aimed at curbing surging housing prices as well as household debts. The bank's outstanding household loans stood at $825 billion as at the end of September. It marks a $1.41 billion increase from a month earlier, but still a sharp drop from the $2.9 billion gain seen in July. The Trump administration says it expects Japan to stop importing Russian oil, once again putting pressure on the supply of the commodity. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said he relayed the demand when he met Japanese Finance Minister Katsunobu Kato in Washington this week. Now, Mr. Kato says Tokyo will do what it can by coordinating with G7 countries for peace in Ukraine. Earlier this month, the G7 countries, which include Japan, agreed to coordinate and to intensify sanctions against Russia. And this includes targeting countries that buy Russian oil. Now, China, however, has hit back, defending its purchases and as normal and legitimate, adding that Washington's demands are, quote, typical examples of unilateral bullying and economic coercion. Meanwhile, U.S. President Trump says that India will stop imports of Russian oil.
No, we were not happy with him buying oil from Russia, because that lets Russia continue on with this ridiculous war where they've lost 1.5 million people. I was not happy that India was buying oil. And he assured me today that they will not be buying oil from Russia. That's a big stop.
The U.S. had punished India with 25% tariffs on its exports, on top of another 25% as part of the administration's so-called reciprocal tariffs. Now, Mr. Trump's announcement comes just days after Washington's new ambassador to India met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And before I go, let's check in on oil prices. Green across the board in the commodity space, with Brent and WTI gaining more than, well, close to 1% for the WTI. Brent crude, though, is up 0.42. And that'll do it for Business. So, Telly.
Thanks so very much for that, Roland. On that note, we're going to zip out for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, a global food crisis has worsened in the past few years, with a few 100 million people facing acute hunger. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Delegates from China and the EU are holding talks at the European Parliament in Brussels. It's their first joint session in more than 7 years, a move that largely signals a thaw in relations, but deep divisions remain. Japan's Iron Lady Sanae Takaichi looks for a new coalition partner in a right-leaning party in her bid for the country's top job. Cambodia's Prime Minister says he regrets the death of a South Korean national in his country as a task force from Seoul arrives to help nationals caught up in scam centers. The World Food Programme says close to 14 million people could be pushed into emergency levels of hunger due to severe funding cuts from top donors.
The global food crisis has gotten worse in the last few years. We estimated there were about 135 million people facing acute hunger before COVID. Right now, we're at 319. So the crisis is affecting many more people. It's gotten more severe.
The WFP, traditionally the UN's most funded agency, says its finances have never been more challenged. Funding is set to fall 40% this year, cutting the agency's budget to $6.4 billion from $10 billion in 2024. While the US still remains its largest donor, but has slashed contributions by nearly $3 billion. Other major sponsors have also pulled back. The WFP reports that 6 countries are, quote, currently facing major disruptions, which will only worsen by year-end. Famine has already been declared in Gaza and Sudan. Food aid is reaching less than 10% of those in need in Afghanistan as winter approaches. Only 600,000 people will receive assistance this month in the Democratic Republic of Congo, far below the 2.3 million originally planned. Airdrops in famine risk areas in South Sudan are also under threat, while families in Haiti are getting just half their usual rations. Well, these warnings come as nations mark World Food Day. The UN has highlighted the strain on global food security ahead of next month's COP30 meeting. Well, that's where leaders are expected to make food systems central to climate action. In a world of plenty, why are millions still going without food? Grace Chin with this report.
There's enough food in the world today to feed every person on Earth, and then some. But food has not always been abundant. In fact, it wasn't even guaranteed. That is until 10,000 years ago when humans began to farm. That agricultural revolution was a turning point. It allowed us to settle, build, and create the very foundations of civilization. Today, more than 1/3 of Earth's land is dedicated to farming. Thanks to technology, modernization, and the Green Revolution, food production expanded rapidly, well into the 21st century. In 2023, the world produced 9.9 billion tons of primary crops. We're now producing more food than there are people on Earth, enough for about 1.2 tons per person each year. That's roughly 3.3 kilograms of food every day for every individual on the planet. So, why does hunger persist? About 2.3 billion people still experience food insecurity in 2024. That's nearly 1 in 4 people globally. And in 2024, 53 countries and territories faced acute food crises, more than the year before. Last year, in Asia alone, 1.1 billion people faced moderate or severe food insecurity. Now, there's enough food for everyone, but billions are still going hungry. And that's because the challenge isn't growing food, it's distributing it. Then let's take a look at Asia, a powerhouse of agricultural exports. Across the region, the pattern is clear. Nations like Thailand, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh rake in billions of dollars each year from farming. They ship out everything from rice and fruit to palm oil, jute, and seafood. But those export numbers don't mean their people are getting essentials on the table. India, one of the largest food exporters on the planet, is also home to some 172 million undernourished people. Child malnutrition rates here are among the highest in the world. Indonesia is another big exporter, yet up to 45 million Indonesians are at risk of hunger, and 7% of the entire population is considered by the Bright Institute to be undernourished. About 16 million people in Bangladesh live with food insecurity, and up to a quarter of its children may have development issues related to malnourishment. Pakistan's food exports are steadily growing, but around 11 million people still face high levels of acute food insecurity. And in Thailand, one of the world's biggest rice producers, an estimated 6 million people go hungry, while 1 in 10 children face severe food poverty. So why are these major global exporters facing such extreme levels of hidden hunger? One reason is rising food prices. Inflation has pushed up the average cost of essential food items, and it could get worse. Last year, 2.6 billion people could not afford a healthy diet. More than half of them were in Asia. A healthy diet means more than just having a full plate. It's about having enough variety, enough nutrients, and the right balance to stay strong. Food exporters are also unable to guarantee domestic affordability. When it's more profitable to sell food abroad, producers prioritize foreign markets. So local supplies shrink and prices soar, making produce unaffordable, which leads to poverty and unequal access. Hunger exists not because there's no food, but because tens of millions are priced out of it. Low incomes, weak infrastructure, and deep-rooted inequality mean nutritious food often does not get to the people who need it most. External shocks are exacerbating the problem. Global conflicts and the COVID-19 pandemic have deepened hunger by disrupting supply chains and inflating prices. And then there's climate change. Extreme weather, the floods in Bangladesh, heat waves in India, droughts in Indonesia are just a few. These damaged harvests push more people into food insecurity. 10 years ago, some 190 countries set the goal of ending hunger by the year of 2030. That's just 5 years away, and the world is falling behind on target. UN agencies are urging stronger policies, more open markets, and long-term solutions to fix what's broken in the food system. Because the real challenge isn't in producing food. It's making sure everyone gets to eat it.
For more insight, CNA spoke with Patrizia Fracassi, Senior Nutrition and Food System Officer at the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. And we started by asking her about the concept of hidden hunger.
Hidden hunger refers to micronutrient deficiency, which is the lack of essential vitamins and minerals like iron, iodine, zinc. And this is despite adequate calorie intake. And as you mentioned, it's an invisible form of malnutrition, unlike famine or acute hunger, which are visible and often linked to emergency. So hidden hunger is chronic and invisible and affects long-term health, cognitive development, and productivity. So globally, 2 billion people suffer from hidden hunger, which is 1 in 2 children under 5 years and 2 in 3 women of reproductive age. And they are at least deficient in one key micronutrient.
You know, when it comes to Asia, why do some of Asia's top food exporters really continue to struggle with hunger and malnutrition at home?
Yes, this was already mentioned before, because we see that there is a focus on exporting what are considered cash crops. So these are crops that are produced majorly for income. And there are not enough policy or strategy that instead allow the redistribution and equal redistribution within the domestic market. So poverty and inequality is a major contributor of hunger and malnutrition at home. We have seen that the price continue to increase, and this affects vulnerable categories much more. In addition to that, we have to see the impact of climate shock and displacement. So a country like Philippines and Bangladesh faced severe weather events and the refugee crisis in 2024. So this is all contributing to hunger and malnutrition despite increased food export.
Indonesia says it's set to buy at least 42 of China's J-10C fighter jets in a deal that's worth nearly $9 billion. Once confirmed, the deal would make Indonesia the second foreign military to operate the jets after Pakistan. It would also be Indonesia's first non-Western aircraft purchase deal. Jakarta currently has fighter jets from the US, Russia and Britain. A Defense Minister, Jeffrey Jamsudin, told reporters it's part of a plan to modernize the Indonesian military and that the jets will, quote, be flying over Jakarta soon. Though China's J-10C fighter jet was reportedly used by the Pakistani Air Force to shoot down India's French-made Rafale jet during the two sides' Kashmir conflict in May. China says that it has seized some 60,000 maps it calls, quote, problematic. Authorities took issue with how Taiwan is labelled, the omission of so-called important islands, as well as Beijing's 9-dash line that show its claim in the South China Sea. The Chinese customs said the maps endanger China's national unity, sovereignty and territorial integrity. It seized them during an inspection of exports in Shandong province. Now, maps are considered sensitive for China and other countries in the region due to competing territorial claims. Meantime, China says that it welcomes and supports Pakistan and Afghanistan's agreement to a 48-hour ceasefire and is ready to play a constructive role. This follows deadly cross-border clashes the United Nations mission in Afghanistan says has killed 18 people and injured more than 360 others. Well, the halt in fighting took effect last evening after both sides said the other had requested the truce. Pakistan's foreign ministry said that the neighbors will prioritize a dialogue to resolve the issue. Afghanistan's Taliban government said it had ordered its forces to hold fire. Residents on both sides had earlier fled their homes following deadly skirmishes along the contested border.
نو پر دا برابر مو د دواړو حکومتونو څخه دا خواست کوو ک طالبان کې د دې خوا حکومت دی دا جنگ وده ځکه دا دواړه د خواته خاتون پښتانه د خاتون پښتانه دا په دې تکلیف اخته و ځکه چې ولاړه د انسانانو د کور وسو.
The recent spate of violence marks the lowest point in relations between the neighbors since the Taliban returned to power in 2021. Both sides have traded blame for the sharp escalation. Hira Mustafa is covering the border situation for CNA.
The tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan along the border is still running high. In the aftermath of the deadly clashes, Pakistani authorities have shut all its border crossings. So it's taking a toll on the traders on both sides of the border as both the countries rely on bilateral trade heavily. And because of this, the traders on both sides of the border are worried about the escalating tensions. And ever since the clashes has erupted between Pakistan and Afghanistan, Pakistan has closed all its vital border crossings. That also includes the Torkham border, which lies in the northwest of the country. And in this whole scenario, people who are living alongside the border are worried to go back to their homes, even though the ceasefire has come into effect, but they are worried that the fight may take place again between the two countries. So it's unlikely what we are hearing from the experts and the officials as of now. It's very unclear at the moment that how soon these border crossings will be opened, and they also say that it relies that how Pakistan is going to take next course of action in order to ease the tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Many of the experts fear that the latest border clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan could turn into a full-scale war, which could be deadly for the entire region. So they believe that with regards to the latest developments and how the ceasefire has come into effect, the friendly countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Iran can play their part as a mediator in easing the tensions between the two neighbors. But then again, they reiterate their stance that Afghanistan needs to take the Pakistan's concerns with regards to the militant groups that Islamabad claims are operating from Afghanistan's soil, militant groups like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, who are carrying out terrorist activities in Pakistan.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, India's stand to benefit most from China's recently launched K-Visa aimed at attracting science, tech and engineering graduates, but it's not without challenges for those looking to apply. Plus,
I want to dress like Blackpink, or I want to dress like Chaunu, something like that.
K-pop has taken the world by storm, and in South Korea, young entrepreneurs have found ways to cash in even with part-time hours. India is one of the countries that stand to benefit the most from China's recently launched K-visa. Well, the work permit for STEM graduates comes as India and China's tensions thaw, and as America's H-1B visas are increasingly out of reach. But the new opportunity comes with its own set of challenges. Rebecca Bundan files this report for CNA.
At this university in Karjat, about 70 kilometres from Mumbai, these undergrads are preparing to become the coders and tech leaders of tomorrow. They'll be part of the large pool of science, technology, engineering and mathematics talent that India churns out. Around 2.5 million of them graduate every year. And the China job market could be their next stop.
China is way ahead in technology. They are advancing day by day in AI, so it will be a great opportunity for us to learn.
If I get any chance, I would of course go to China and I'll learn something and I'll come back to India.
These students are the kind of talent that China wants to attract with its new K-visa, launched at the beginning of October for STEM graduates. But Tarun Anand, the Chancellor of Universal AI University, who has worked extensively in China, says it's still too early to make concrete plans.
It's a first move of opening up and making it comparable in some extent and reducing the burden of employer visas, employers guaranteeing jobs to students. So I think in a sense it is interesting, but it's the first step that China has made. It needs to create an ecosystem to attract international students, we are miles away from that.
The language barrier is a key challenge. Unlike the US, which has traditionally been the top pick for Indian tech professionals wanting to work abroad. But US President Donald Trump recently imposed a $100,000 fee for its popular H-1B visa, making it too costly for many firms in the US to hire Indian citizens who require these visas. Experts say China wants to capitalize on this.
With the recent changes in visa and immigration rules in the US, the K-visa opens up a new pathway for these students to explore opportunities in a vibrant and dynamic market like China. And like many other things that are happening around the world today, global opportunities are becoming more and more available to graduating students.
This visa processing firm in India says it's already seeing interest.
I mean, there's definitely a buzz around this, and we are absolutely getting some of the, inquiries.
But it's still awaiting exact guidelines before it can open up K-visa applications. Timing might be everything, as global competition for STEM talent heats up.
China isn't alone in the race to recruit global tech talent. Countries like South Korea, Germany and New Zealand are also taking steps that make it easier for skilled professionals from India to move and work there.
They offer other options to graduates who aren't too excited about China.
It doesn't provide that freedom and that diversities which are provided in the other countries like the US and UK.
There has also been pushback in China, which produces a large number of its own STEM graduates.
Chinese talent needs jobs. Indian talent needs jobs. I think it's going to be an interesting move to open the door. Let's see. But I don't see it's going to be a tsunami of movement in that direction yet.
The K-visa launch also comes as tensions between New Delhi and Beijing are easing, following deadly military border clashes in 2020. It's created hope for more collaboration between the world's two most populous nations, and new reasons for India's skilled workforce to look eastward. For CNA, I'm Rebecca Bundan in Mumbai.
K-pop and K-drama have taken the world by storm. And in South Korea, entrepreneurs are making the most of it. One young woman has found a way to earn a full-time salary on part-time hours by going shopping. Well, CNA's Money Mind finds out how.
Laura can make a client go from this to this
just by shopping for the right outfits.
Some of them really ask us, I want to dress like Blackpink, or I want to dress like Cha Eun-woo, something like that.
31-year-old Laura is a fashion stylist and personal shopper. People call on her when they want to look like Korean celebrities. And they're willing to pay as much as $130 an hour just for her to go shopping with them. Many of her customers are tourists who want to buy into the Korean look. Today, the clients are a family visiting South Korea from Singapore.
My husband had said he wanted an update in his wardrobe. He's getting older and I didn't want him to look like his father anymore.
Sejal has booked the session as a surprise birthday present for her husband. He may be 1 year older, but she's hoping the makeover will give him a fresh look. The family used to live in South Korea and still miss the fashion aesthetic there.
It's urban, it's hip, but it can also look very elegant. I love neutral colors. I know my husband does too, and I think it works well in different cultural environments. I'm American, he's European, we live in Singapore. So I think this kind of style endures in many different places. So that's why we really like K-fashion.
Laura has picked out a selection of clothes based on their preferences and budget.
It really gave me a really new perspective on what I could wear because I thought that only a couple things would look okay on me, and really what the outfits that I've been trying today really look good, and I wouldn't have expected that. I'm surprised by how affordable some of those pieces are. Like, they look really sharp, and the quality looks really good, but they're quite, I would say, within affordable range.
So we usually do the same process for the personal shopping service. When the order is received, we give the customer the pre-interview survey, and based on the answer, we select what spot is best for the customer and what fashion brand we're gonna recommend them. And then we go shopping and enjoy shopping.
Laura has been a fashion stylist for several years. She's curated outfits for Korean dance groups, advertisements, and fashion brands. She started offering her services to foreign tourists as an additional source of income. And now, it's become her top source of income.
In total, both for B2B business and personal shopping service, the average income for a month is 9 million won. Only for the personal shopping service, I can tell it's about 6 million won. There are no exact daily routine for me because my schedule always depends on the customers. In average, we work 3 or 4 hours a day and again 3 or 4 days a week.
Well, for the full Money Mind episode, do log on to YouTube, MeWatch, and our website, cna.asia. In other news, Singapore state investor firm GIC is not currently suing Chinese electric vehicle maker NIO and its executives. This, according to people close to the matter, who spoke to CNA anonymously. It comes after news reports that alleged GIC's lawsuit against NIO. Now, this is a recent document that has been circulating, a lawsuit by GIC against NIO's current chairman and CEO Lee Bin and former chief financial officer Feng Wei. CNA understands this lawsuit has been put on hold. According to sources, this document was filed to preserve GIC's interests so that it can retain both its options of staying or opting out of a class action lawsuit. GIC has been part of an ongoing U.S. class action lawsuit against NIO since 2022. The lawsuit alleges that NIO had misled investors by overstating the company's revenue and profits. The class action involves other investors who purchased its listed securities that were issued from August 2020 to July 2022. And that's this Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Thanks for watching.